The moment I saw that watch, my blood turned to ice water. My husband's face lit up with joy as he unwrapped the elegant box from my parents. But all I could do was stare in horror and whisper, "Don't touch it." You see, that wasn't just any watch. It was his watch. The one that should have been buried with him 15 years ago. Let me start from the beginning, because this story, my story, is one of betrayal so deep it shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Sarah, and up until 6 months ago, I believed I was living the perfect life. I had been married to David for 12 years, and we had built what everyone called a fairy tale marriage. He was charming, successful, and treated me like a queen. My parents, Margaret and Robert, adored him almost as much as I did. We had dinner with them every Sunday, celebrated every holiday together, and they often joked that David was the son they never had. But perfection, I've learned, is often just an illusion hiding the most devastating truths. It all started to unravel 3 months before David's 40th birthday. I had been planning something special, a surprise party with all our friends and family. While going through old photo albums in my parents' attic to create a slideshow, I stumbled upon a box I'd never seen before. Inside were photographs that made my heart stop. There was my mother, 20 years younger, laughing with a man who wasn't my father. Her arms were wrapped around him, her face glowing with the kind of happiness I rarely saw anymore. But it wasn't just any man. It was someone who looked exactly like David, the same piercing blue eyes, the same crooked smile, even the same dimple on his left cheek. My hands shook as I flipped through more photos. There were dozens of them, intimate moments, romantic dinners, walks on the beach, and in several photos, the man was wearing a distinctive vintage Rolex with a unique inscription on the back that I could just make out. "To my darling James. Forever yours, M. James." My mother had never mentioned anyone named James. I confronted my mother that evening, my voice barely steady. "Mom, who is James?" The color drained from her face instantly. She tried to dismiss it, claiming he was just an old friend, but I could see the panic in her eyes. When I pressed harder, showing her the photos, she broke down completely. Through tears, she told me the truth that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. He was the love of my life," she whispered. "Before I married your father, before you were born. We were engaged, Sarah, but he died in a car accident just weeks before our wedding. I was devastated, destroyed. Your father helped me through the grief, and eventually we fell in love and married. But that wasn't the worst part. Sarah," she continued, her voice breaking, "James had a son. A little boy named David, who went to live with his grandmother after James died. I lost touch with them. I had to, for my own sanity." The room started spinning. "What are you saying, Mom?" "You're David. When you first brought him home 12 years ago, I recognized him immediately. He's James's son, but he doesn't know who I am. He was only 5 when his father died, and his grandmother moved them across the country. When he introduced himself, he was using his stepfather's last name. I felt like I was drowning. You've known this entire time? For 12 years, you've known that my husband is your dead fiancé's son, and you never told me?" "I couldn't. Don't you see? It would have ruined everything. You were so happy, and David is such a good man." What did it matter? What did it matter? I was married to the son of my mother's first love, the man she admitted she never stopped loving. Every Sunday dinner, every holiday, every family gathering, she had been staring at the ghost of her past through my husband's face. But the revelations weren't over. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed with uncovering the truth. I hired a private investigator to look into David's family history. What I discovered made my mother's deception look like a small white lie. David knew exactly who my mother was. The investigator found records showing that David had been searching for my mother for years before we met. He had tracked down her married name, her address, even her daily routines. Our chance meeting at that coffee shop 12 years ago? It wasn't chance at all. He had orchestrated everything. The investigator also uncovered something else. David had been in contact with his grandmother his entire adult life, and she had kept everything from his father's belongings, including that distinctive Rolex watch. My husband, the man I loved and trusted, had deliberately sought me out and married me as some twisted way to get close to the woman his father had loved. I was never his wife. I was his pathway to my mother. The final piece of the puzzle came when I found hidden documents in David's office at home. Bank statements showing payments to a private investigator dating back 13 years. Love letters he had written but never sent addressed to my mother. And most chilling of all, a detailed plan outlining how he would integrate himself into our family. I felt sick reading his notes. Sarah is sweet but naive. She'll be the perfect way to get close to Margaret. Margaret destroyed my father by leaving him, and she needs to pay for what she did. Wait, leaving him? But my mother said James died in a car accident. More investigation revealed the devastating truth. James hadn't died in a car accident. He had committed suicide after my mother broke their engagement and disappeared without explanation, leaving him and 5-year-old David behind. David blamed my mother for his father's death, and marrying me was his long-term revenge plan. But David had underestimated one crucial thing. While he was plotting his revenge against my mother, he had genuinely fallen in love with me. The private investigator found evidence that David had stopped his surveillance and revenge planning about 5 years into our marriage. His recent letters showed genuine confusion and guilt about his original motives. Still, the betrayal cut too deep. Everything I believed about my marriage, my family, my entire adult life was built on lies and manipulation. So I decided to plan my own revenge. For David's 40th birthday, I convinced my mother to send him a gift. I told her I had found some old belongings of James's, and thought David might appreciate having something of his father's. She was reluctant, but I insisted it would be a meaningful gesture. What I didn't tell her was that I had already confronted David about everything I'd discovered. 3 days before his birthday, I laid out all the evidence on our kitchen table, the photos, the investigation reports, the letters, everything. When David came home from work, I was sitting there waiting. "Hello, David," I said calmly. Or should I say, "Hello, James's son who's been lying to me for 12 years. The look on his face, shock, terror, relief, guilt, told me everything I needed to know. He broke down immediately, sobbing like the 5-year-old boy who had lost his father. "Sarah, please let me explain. Yes, I sought you out initially because of your mother. But I fell in love with you. Really, truly fell in love with you. The last 7 years, I've been trying to figure out how to tell you the truth without losing you." 7 years, David? You've been keeping this secret for 7 years after you claim you wanted to tell me? I was terrified. How do you tell your wife that you married her under false pretenses? How do you explain that you blamed her mother for your father's death? But Sarah, I learned the truth about what really happened. Your mother didn't leave my father heartlessly. She was 17 and pregnant. My world tilted again. What? She was pregnant with another man's child, your father's child. She was pregnant with you. She tried to tell my father, but he wouldn't listen. He accused her of cheating, of lying. She left because she had to protect herself and her unborn baby. My father's suicide wasn't her fault. It was his own inability to handle the truth. I stared at him in stunned silence. Your mother never knew he died, Sarah. She thought he had moved on, maybe even married someone else. She carried guilt about breaking the engagement for decades, never knowing what really happened to him. The room was spinning again, but this time for different reasons. My mother had been carrying unnecessary guilt for 40 years, and David had been carrying unnecessary hatred for 35 years. So what now? I asked quietly. David looked at me with desperate hope. Now I'm asking for forgiveness I probably don't deserve. I'm asking for a chance to rebuild our marriage on truth instead of lies. I love you, Sarah. That was never fake. I made him leave that night. I needed time to think, to process, to decide if a marriage built on such a foundation could ever be real. Which brings me back to his birthday, 3 days later. When my parents arrived with that elegantly wrapped box, I knew exactly what was inside. I had orchestrated the whole thing. The watch that had belonged to James David's father was my test. As David unwrapped it, his hands began to shake. He recognized it immediately. "Don't touch it," I said, making everyone in the room freeze. My parents looked confused. David looked terrified. Our friends, who had come for the surprise party, stared in awkward silence. "That watch," I continued, standing up slowly, "belonged to James Mitchell, David's father." The silence in the room was deafening. I looked at my mother, whose face had gone completely white. "Mom, meet David Mitchell, son of James Mitchell, the man you were engaged to 40 years ago." My mother's legs gave out, and my father caught her before she hit the ground. I looked at David, who was staring at my mother with a mixture of pain and longing. "And David, meet Margaret, the woman your father loved so much that losing her broke his heart." What happened next was the most emotionally devastating and beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. My mother, tears streaming down her face, whispered, "You have his eyes. Oh God, you have James's exact eyes." David, also crying now, said quietly, "He talked about you every day until he died. He said you were the most beautiful woman in the world, inside and out." They embraced not romantically, but with the desperate grief of two people who had lost the same man and found each other 40 years too late. My father, bless his heart, understood immediately. He held them both while they cried for James, for lost time, for the pain they had both carried for so long. And me? I watched my husband and my mother heal 40-year-old wounds in my living room, surrounded by our confused friends and family. That night, after everyone had gone home and my parents had stayed to talk through decades of misunderstanding, David and I sat alone in our kitchen. "So what now?" he asked, echoing my question from 3 days earlier. I looked at this man I had loved for 12 years. This man who had deceived me, but had also genuinely loved me. This man who was connected to my family in ways I never could have imagined. "Now," I said, taking off my wedding ring, "we start over, completely over. No lies, no secrets, no manipulation. If you want to be married to me, you're going to have to court me again. Honestly this time?" David nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'd like that very much." "And David? Next time you plan a surprise for someone, maybe don't make it a 40-year revenge plot." Despite everything, he laughed, noted. 6 months later, David and I are in marriage counseling. We're taking it slow, rebuilding trust brick by brick. He moved into the guest bedroom and is proving every day that he deserves a second chance. My mother and David have developed a beautiful relationship. She tells him stories about his father, and he shares memories of James that he had forgotten. My father, incredibly, has been nothing but supportive, understanding that some loves transcend time and circumstance. The watch sits in our living room now, in a place of honor, not as a symbol of deception or revenge, but as a reminder that love, loss, and family are more complicated than we ever imagine. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's healing the wounds they created and building something beautiful from the broken pieces. David is earning back my trust, one honest conversation at a time. And maybe, just maybe, we'll have a love story even more powerful than the one built on lies. After all, the best revenge is living well and loving truly.